South Africa's municipalities are facing challenges. Join Kagiso Trust in partnership with BizNews from June to explore radical collaboration between local government and communities, creating circles of unity for mutual benefit. We'll host dialogues, Twitter spaces, and a breakfast seminar with leaders and experts. Join us to tackle corruption, service delivery, and improve local government. Join us in this important conversation. Hashtag radical collaboration. Hashtag power of the circle. Hashtag get involved.
Welcome, everybody, and thanks for making the time to talk to us as we discuss the Radical Collaboration campaign that is brought to you by Kagiso Trust. And my guests include the Chairperson of Kagiso Trust, Mankone Ntsaba, who's with us here to tell us more about this campaign, and Paul Smith, who's been working at local level, especially in the Mankone district of the Eastern Cape, will tell us about his practical experiences. And Professor Themba Maseko, who's with Wits Business School, has worked for the government for a long period of time, an activist in his own right, and takes a keen interest at civic issues and matters of this nature. So we'll help make sense of what the objectives of this campaign are all about and the type of issues we're going to cover and why it matters to you as a citizen in South Africa and why civic activism and involvement at local level matters and the difference that it can make. So I'd like to thank you once again for you making the time to be with us. Welcome. Now, Chairperson, I go straight to you. Radical Collaboration Campaign. Your objectives with this, and thank you for making me part of this, by the way.
Thank you very much, Tim, for allowing us to get into your studio and to talk to South Africa and the world about this, what we call the Radical Collaboration Campaign by Kagiso Trust. We know of all the challenges that are facing the country, more especially at local government level. Challenges, we start off with challenges. They escalate and become problems. Problems escalate, become a crisis, until a crisis becomes a disaster. And I think it is incumbent upon us to intervene in that space, not to intervene because we have all the tools of intervention, but we believe that with the experience that we have at Kagiso Trust, we have intervened between the citizens of South Africa and the apartheid state previously. And we believe that we are in a position to intervene when we realize that the citizens are getting the wrong end of the stick in the local government space. So we realize that individual organizations and individuals or government alone or business alone or NGOs alone cannot handle the challenges that are facing us. And we realize that it is important that we encourage collaboration among stakeholders. No matter how small an organization or how big an organization, collaboration, we've seen it before in our experience that it always brings fruits that are necessary to deal with the challenges. So the purpose really is to really start a campaign that says, wake up everybody. Please let us put our heads together, our resources together, our everything together in dealing with this monstrosity of a problem.
Well, one can argue and think about this and say, once you're voted as a resident in a particular municipality, you leave it to the councillors, to the local government to get going and deliver on the mandate that they would have sought from the voters. But we know from our experience that that's not always the case, right? Now, Paul, you have practical experience of what happens at local level. And please cite the examples of what you've seen that has required you to intervene. And one example being the Mankone community in the Eastern Cape.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. What's really important is that we need an enabling environment for development to be planned and organized and implemented. And as we approached municipalities, we worked in more than one municipality around the country. We probably worked in about 15. And the problem seems to be common, not only in Mankone and the Eastern Cape, where the polarization of stakeholders really disabling the ability for development. And municipalities in their own right are enablers for development, but critical enablers, because all the infrastructure and service delivery falls within the local government mandate to deliver those. But on the other side of the coin, community also have a responsibility to contribute to creating an enabling environment. And we found that local communities are very polarized. And even where there is active citizenry, it's really insular and therefore leading to less impact. So we've got to create environments where people come together and collaborate around ideation and solutions for localities. And the chance of success is just greater if there's more people that participate in the process.
Well, an argument can be made by an ordinary person in the street to say, but we've elected the councillors, they do have the budgets, they do have the mandate, and they know what they should do. Why are the critical things that are supposed to be done, not done by those in charge of these municipalities?
Tim, that's a fair comment. And, we do elect leaders, but we also give people agency to lead on our behalf as communities, both in a private capacity, within institutions, within community and municipalities. And I think getting involved as an active citizen, and certainly in civic coalitions and where there's collaboration, we're in a better position to hold those leaders who we give agency to account for their performance. And but I also think within municipalities, we have to, in order for people to collaborate, and we advocate for people collaborating with municipalities for better outcomes. But it does take, what is important is it takes two partners that are competent to collaborate. It's very difficult collaborating with a partner that's not competent. And so we have to focus on building municipal institutions and building coherence within municipalities as well to foster healthy collaboration.
Professor Themba Maseko, you are in the space of governance and you've worked in the public sector for a long period of time and you are an activist in your own right. What do you think is the problem in the South African context at municipal level? I mean, I'm going to come back to Paul in a moment, talking about the other stakeholders, but I'm staying with my question of, we have the system, we vote, we elect councillors, they're given budgets, and then there's the whole pomp and ceremony, titles, you name it, everything is there, but many municipalities face challenges. From your observation and experience, what's going on?
Tim, I think the first point I'd like to make is that, the law requires every municipality to actually develop what is called an integrated development plan, which is an IDP for short, which requires municipalities to hold meetings with communities to identify the needs of communities and give communities opportunity to actually influence the plans that are ultimately implemented by municipalities. So you have political parties coming up with political manifestos. They get elected into municipalities. Now, those manifestos must be informed by what the needs and requirements of communities. But unfortunately, the challenge I'm seeing from where I'm sitting as a School of Governance is that when these meetings are convened, where MMCs and councillors and senior managers in local government are supposed to go back to communities to consult, to identify the needs, and then give report back to communities, we find that there's not enough community participation in those fora, which are a legal requirement, by the way. So before a municipality can finalize its plans, it has to convene these community or stakeholder meetings. The voice of communities is not coming out as strong as it should be, because most citizens actually do not see it as their responsibility to tell municipalities what areas or issues need to be prioritized. And I think that's where a campaign such as the one Kagiso Trust is talking about now could play an important role to actually urge communities to begin to take these processes seriously, to make submissions to municipalities to say, these are our priorities, and make sure that those become integrated into the IDPs of municipalities. The problem, obviously, is that councillors are not held accountable by communities, and communities believe that it's enough to just vote and walk away. But the challenges we face today basically are confirming the needs for communities or citizens to be actively involved by participating in these IDPs. But obviously, there are issues of lack of skills as well at councillor level, because many of the people we are finding who get elected as councillors have never actually had a responsibility of serving communities. So that's where we come in as Wits University School of Governance to provide training to municipalities, to councillors, to mayors, to managers, to say this is how an IDP needs to be implemented. You need to give regular feedback to communities, and communities need to give feedback to these councillors and actually hold them accountable. But these meetings are not happening quite sufficiently and regularly. So I think this initiative can play a very vital role of just encouraging citizens and communities to get involved in their own governance and not just hand it over to elected
Sure.
councillors.
I have to ask you this question that people, members of communities would say, we hear you, we understand you, but what is the incentive for us to participate in these meetings? For councillors, obviously they get paid, and the officials, they are required by law to do the things that you've mentioned. But an ordinary resident is not required by law to do anything. And having said that, I want to cite the example of Hammanskraal in the Greater Tshwane area. People will turn around and say, Professor Maseko, please hold your beer. We have been talking about supply of water for a long time and no one is listening to us, and we don't know where and who to turn to. How do you respond to the first part of the question and the example that I've given?
Look, I mean, the incentive for citizens to participate is through participation that they can influence decision-making at a municipal level to make sure that priorities are aligned to needs of communities. And remember, this is required by law. Councillors are required to go to communities and consult and say, what are your priorities? What are your needs? And that gets informed or gets integrated or incorporated into the IDP. Now, the problem is that not enough is being done to inform communities that this is the IDP or the development plan that we've designed as a municipality with your input. This is the time frame to implement your requirements, and etc. So they must use that as a tool to monitor performance. The incentive being that you get better delivery if you hold councillors accountable. But the real problem at the moment we're facing, Tim, is I think the political dynamics in the system. Let's take, for example, the issue of coalition governments. It is a good thing that you have more parties now participating in governance. But the instability is creating a delivery vacuum in the system because there are too many vacancies in municipalities because coalition or political parties in the coalition are not moving fast enough to get people appointed, to monitor performance and delivery, to make sure that there's no corruption. So the state of governance at local government level, I think it's a very shaky ground at this stage. But the communities can't just stand by. They need to call councillors and make sure that these councillors are accountable. If there's no water, communities must really stand up and say, Mr. Mayor or Mrs. Mayor, we don't have clean water. What are you going to do about it? And demand action from municipalities. So that's really the incentive, because if we leave these councillors on their own devices, chances are that they're going to look after their own back pockets. They'll worry about their own salaries and there'll be lots of corruption. And it's only citizens who can actually rise, and they can do so by participating in campaigns such as the one that Kagiso Trust is talking about. So I think that one way in which we can get citizens to really see the benefits of participating is through education, so that we inform them about what are the channels of participating, how do you hold councillors accountable. And I think this campaign does give the country the opportunity to actually get citizens to be involved in their own governance.
Thanks very much there, Professor Themba Maseko, for your input. And of course, Paul, as coming back to you, you have the practical experience, and you've gone out to the communities and you've assisted them over the years. What is a better way of communicating with the members of communities, right? The residents and citizens, as it were, for them to participate in these meetings to make inputs into the IDPs?
Yeah, Tim, the IDP process is pretty much at the moment in many of our municipalities is a process of just disseminating of information, and not really a collective process of designing the type of development that's required. And I think from a community perspective, we have to help communities structure themselves properly. And this is a process of really helping people to self-determine what structure best works for them. Because I think at the end of the day, if we create a civic coalition that includes the majority of influential and stakeholders locally, of non-government stakeholders, we slowly find that there's a growing groundswell of interest in this coalition, because there are green shoots that start emerging and behavior change in the municipality that starts emerging. And as that momentum grows, so the civic coalition can grow as well, because most people are quite comfortable in standing on the sidelines and complaining and throwing stones at the municipality for non-delivery. But very few are actually happy to put their hat in the ring and participate. So we urge communities to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. Within municipalities, we also need to empower municipalities to adopt a more vulnerable stance in engaging communities at the start of the development of the IDPs or any other types of projects. And so that and if you give communities the opportunity to participate, you're actually creating an inclusive governance environment where it leads to community-centric development. But this takes time for behavior change within the municipality. And we all know that institutions perform as well as the people that are employed there. And we know that leadership in the institutions influence the way the institution performs. And so we have to change the way leaders in municipalities are thinking about the creation, ideation, and implementation of important projects. And that takes time. But the more we create open dialogue between communities and municipalities, the more we see the first of all, the personal shift from being sort of egocentric in their thinking to become ecosystem centric, where you start making decisions in the interest of the greater community. And that's an important step to take for everybody, both in community and in the municipality.
Mayor Mankone Ntsaba, as the chairperson of the Kagiso Trust, and I'm going back to the bigger topic that we're discussing here, the radical collaboration campaign, because we're going to have other discussions going forward. From your experience, what do you think are the critical factors that need to be looked at in order to achieve the objectives of this campaign? And on top of that, to at least mitigate the immediate problems that communities face when it comes to, firstly, the design of the IDPs and the implementation thereof, and the consequence of which is the improvement of quality of life of residents in the different municipalities.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. There are a number of critical factors, and one of them is stakeholder involvement in the development of localities. You know, as you started, I wanted to interject and say my answer to your question is an emphatic no, in that citizens just vote and they put councillors in place and they wait for the councillors to do the right thing. I think the law, if we interpret it that way, that is not actually what the law says. The law says once that has been done, there's a provision in one of the acts that says citizens have a right to participate, whether it's in the budgeting, whether it's in the planning, but the way municipalities have been treating citizens and treating stakeholders is such that there has not been a conducive environment for stakeholders to participate and actually make a difference. For instance, there are civic associations in every locality that you go to that you'll find that are in opposite ends with the municipality and with politicians and so on. And what we are saying is that those 2 or 3 stakeholders that are at each other's throats should now begin a dialogue. This one of the critical factors is dialoguing. We must create a dialogue between these stakeholders that are at each other's throats and they are not working together. And we hope, as Paul has stated, when we first started in Makana, that was the situation. People were not talking to each other. They were talking through the courts. Well, they're still going to court, but at least they're beginning to sit in one room and talk about issues that are thorny. Another critical factor is that once people begin to talk, you begin to understand each other, and the level of trust, which is missing in the local government space, the trust begins to come into the space, and people begin to trust each other, and they begin to hold each other to account. Where politicians or municipal officials are not held to account, they do their own things. And as Professor Maseko said, they would look after their pockets, they would look after their friends, they would look after and then that's where corruption starts. But when civil society and business and the politicians are in one room, looking each other in the face and starting a dialogue, they begin to ask some thorny questions that actually gets municipal officials to start thinking and acting differently. You mentioned the issue of Hammanskraal. Hammanskraal is an old issue, as you rightly put it. It's over 20 years. The water issue in Hammanskraal is actually over 20 years. Citizens have been talking about this, complaining to various administrations of Tshwane. But I think what was the major problem is that citizens without proper organized organizations and institutions, they are weakened and they are unable to tackle municipal staff or municipal decision making. But where civil society is organized and able and empowered, because one of our critical areas in Kagiso Trust is to empower civil society. We actually have a program within Kagiso Trust that empowers civil society. We know very well that our civil society in the 80s and 90s was very strong. But post-94, our civil society organizations began to wane down. People were absorbed into government, funding disappeared, and we have a weakened, not a weak, but a weakened civil society. So we empower civil society in these municipalities to be able to engage on an equal platform with municipalities and politicians.
All right. Well, there are many issues on the in the political landscape, and others are emerging as we go forward, and we're going to touch on some of those. I would like to hear your comment, Professor Themba Maseko and Paul Smith. I'm coming to you to give us a broad comment to these issues. We're going to drill into them. They've been raised in this discussion. One of them is probably a need for electoral reform. That's number one. 2, professionalizing local government. 3 is that of corruption and social justice. The provision of infrastructure is one of the key responsibilities of local governments, and also coalitions and collaboration. What is your view, Professor Maseko, on those particular issues? Is there a specific one that you think needs to be highlighted more?
I think that electoral reform is important, and I think it's coming. We're beginning to see a change in the political environment with the emergence of coalition governments, and I would urge communities to pay greater attention to people they elect into these positions as councillors, because at the end of the day, those are people who are supposed to be delivering or in charge of delivering services. And my sense is that as communities, we're not paying enough attention to the kind of people who get elected into these positions. But secondly, the local government sphere requires urgent modernization, and the idea of professionalizing the service is becoming very important, because you have a climate where when a political party comes into being, they then want to employ their own people to work in the council offices as civil servants. And that's where the whole notion of deployment comes into the picture, where each party wants to bring its own people into the administration. And in doing so, not enough attention is paid to making sure that skilled and competent and qualified people get appointed into positions of authority in the municipalities. And when that happens, you start having a vicious cycle where services are not being delivered to communities. You have councillors without skills. You have officials in government institutions at local government who do not have the capacity to actually deliver these kinds of services. And I think that we also need to review the structures of municipalities themselves. I mean, the fact that we We don't have something that used to exist in the past, a city engineer, that is an administrator who is responsible to look after the infrastructure of a municipality, be it roads, water, potholes, and all of those kinds of things. So when you look at these IDP plans, you can clearly see that, in fact, there's not enough professional attention paid to the most urgent needs facing communities. So all of these things, I don't think one intervention solves all the problems, but there are different interventions that are required. What I will urge Kagiso Trust to do in this initiative of getting communities and civil society to work with municipalities, I think that's a very important step. But we need to also use existing fora. This IDP community forum, where mayors and MMCs are actually required by law to consult with communities to say, this is our party manifesto, but this is what we are trying to develop as a plan for our municipality to make sure that all our interventions, service delivery interventions, are integrated. That's already a legal forum that is available. The problem is that there isn't enough attention paid into those structures by communities themselves. So a campaign such as your Kagiso Trust initiative now can play an important role to go to communities, civil societies, and say, there's an existing forum. How can we use it for our benefit? At this stage, all you get is these elected leaders coming to say, this is the plan, telling communities and not giving them the opportunity to say, your plan doesn't meet our requirements, our needs. And those opportunities are not being used to hold councillors accountable. So a lot of these things need to happen. But I think that if we empower communities, we empower citizens, we empower civil society to take responsibility for creating mechanisms for citizens to become actively involved, I think would have actually solved half the problem, because then communities will be in a better position to hold these councillors and mayors accountable. Because at this stage, they are not accountable to anybody. That's why we're experiencing the kinds of problems.
Sure. All right. Thanks very much, Professor Themba Maseko. Paul Smith, again, going back to your on-the-ground work, of the points that I've raised earlier and some that we're going to delve into, which one would you highlight as the most critical? And how would that factor tie up with other issues that we have raised?
Tim, I think they're all important. I think what we have got to keep in mind, and I'm basing this on some desktop research we're doing at the moment, looking at successful municipalities and trying to identify what they do right. And a couple of things become preliminary findings are that, first of all, we don't run institutions like municipalities to achieve a clean audit. We run institutions to serve communities. And so community centricity is really important. And the second thing around professionalization, and Kagiso Trust has learned this lesson in the education sector as well, is that in order to give people the skills and to support the development of municipalities through upskilling various departments, is only really useful if people within those departments are ready for that and ready to adopt those skills. But organizational culture is a serious problem within municipalities at the moment. So even people with the right skills are not performing. And so we have to focus on what drives institutional culture. And from a Kagiso perspective, we believe that that leadership and management are the key catalyst for culture change in municipalities. So before we start focusing on skills and qualification, which we think are really important, we need to get the attitude and mindset of people who work in those institutions right. From electoral reform perspective, what we are finding in successful municipalities is that the role of the municipal manager is elevated. And in many municipalities where that are underperforming, we find that the role of politicians is more pronounced than the municipal manager. And I think we need strong management in place and a clear understanding and execution of roles and responsibilities within those institutions to make sure that they perform. The other critical issue is obviously the right people in the right positions. We have to have proper qualified people in the right positions to execute that work. And if we don't, we must understand the consequences which we've seen over the last many years.
Sure.
And so one of the the also interesting trends we need to note from the previous local government election was the growing independent candidates. And many of the successful municipalities, most of the councillors and officials reside in the communities they're supposed to serve and not come from outside communities. And this is really important because councillors and municipal officials go to bars and restaurants and church within their communities and are held accountable on a day-to-day basis, and therefore take the purpose of their work a bit more seriously. So repurposing institutions is really important for Kagiso Trust. Otherwise, we're going to suffer the same consequences as we have for a number of years. Thanks.
Well, Chairperson, the last word belongs to you. We're still going to have discussions on some of the points that I raised. And how do you sum up our discussion this morning?
We are very glad as the Kagiso Trust and our stakeholders that this discussion, this conversation is taking place. It has been taking place, but not at this formal level. And first things first, conversation first. And once we have started this conversation, we now have to get people thinking and making inputs into what we are trying to do. The problem is huge, Tim. The Auditor General's, what the Auditor General told us recently, it sounds like doom and gloom. The dysfunctionalities that we're picking up in many different municipalities, whether it's a Metro, Mangaung, Metro, Tshwane, Ditsobotla, it's really dire. And I think the issue that we are raising about people raising their hands to say we want to participate, people must not feel that they are being undermined. And with this collaboration, this radical collaboration, I think we will, it is, if we can get it right, people participating and holding municipalities to account. As Professor Maseko says, half the challenge or half the problem or half the battle will have been won. I think that would be my parting shot.
Sure. And we will be having further discussions, as I've indicated, on some of the points that were raised in this conversation. Let me take the opportunity to thank you, Chairperson Mankone Ntsaba, for having been part of us in this discussion. And the radical collaboration campaign, that is what we're running. Paul Smith, thanks again for your inputs and sharing with us your practical experience, as well as Professor Themba Maseko of Wits Business School for your inputs and guiding us on some of the points that as citizens, as civic society should participate meaningfully in the development of some of the development programs of the municipalities. We appreciate your time and your input. I thank you all. Thank you very much until we have further discussions.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you,
Cheerio.
Bye, colleagues.
Bye, colleagues.